The fiancé who chose a mechanic over a billionaire. And a 3-year-old girl changed everything. She stood at the altar in a $40,000 dress, smiled at a man worth $4 billion, and carried the secret of another man's baby in her belly. For 8 months she played the perfect fiancé. She attended the charity galas. She wore the diamonds. She kissed him for the cameras. And every single night, she drove 30 minutes across town to a small garage apartment that smelled like motor oil and takeout food, to be with the man she actually loved. She thought she had it all figured out. She thought no one would ever find out. But she forgot about one person. A 3-year-old little girl. Toddler who could barely tie her shoes. A child who still slept with a stuffed bunny and called apple juice, with 2 extra U's. That little girl, the maid's daughter, saw everything, remembered everything. And one afternoon, in front of everyone, in her tiny innocent voice, she said it all out loud. And from that moment forward, nothing was ever the same again. Before we get into this story, drop a comment right now and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the USA, the UK, Canada, Australia, India, Germany? I want to know. This community is growing every single day and I love seeing where you all are coming from. Drop your country below, say hello, and let's get into this story because this one is going to wreck you in the best possible way. Her name was Vivian Cole and she was 28 years old, and she was the kind of beautiful that made people forget what they were about to say. Not just physically beautiful, though she was that too, with warm brown eyes that somehow looked both soft and sharp at the same time, and dark hair she usually wore loose, falling past her shoulders like she hadn't tried. She was the kind of beautiful that came from being smart and funny and knowing exactly how to read a room. She could walk into a party where she knew no one and walk out with 3 new best friends and a job offer. She had that energy, magnetic, warm, effortless. Growing up, Vivian had not had a single easy thing handed to her. She was raised by her mother alone in a small apartment in Cleveland, Ohio. Her mother worked 2 jobs, one at a dry cleaner, one at a hospital cafeteria, and still some months they had to choose between the electric bill and groceries. Vivian learned early that the world was not going to slow down for her. She learned to move fast. She learned to be charming because charm was free. She learned to smile even when her feet hurt, even when she was tired, even when she felt like lying down on the floor and not getting up. She got a partial scholarship to a small university, worked nights and weekends to cover the rest, graduated with a degree in communications, and landed an entry-level job at a PR firm in New York City. She was 23. She had $400 in her bank account and a suitcase with a broken wheel. She worked harder than anyone else in that office. She came in early and stayed late. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She solved problems before people knew they had them. And within 3 years, she had climbed from intern adjacent to junior executive, managing accounts worth more than anything she had ever imagined touching. That was where she met Elliot Ashford. Elliot was 38 years old, and he was the CEO of Ashford Global, a company that had its fingers in real estate, technology, pharmaceuticals, and private aviation. His net worth was estimated at somewhere between $3 and $4 billion, depending on which financial publication you read. He was tall, silver-templed, with a kind of posture that came from being told your whole life that the room belongs to you. He was not unkind. He was not cruel. He was just precise, controlled. He treated the world like a chessboard, and he was always 3 moves ahead. His company hired Vivian's PR firm to handle a campaign launch. She was assigned as the lead contact. Their first meeting lasted 4 hours. He was supposed to be there for 45 minutes. He called her the next morning to extend the contract. 3 months later they were dating. Vivian told herself it was love. And maybe part of it was. Elliot was brilliant. He challenged her in ways no one else had. He took her to places she had only ever seen in magazines. A private island in the Maldives, a vineyard in Tuscany, A sunset dinner in a restaurant that required a 6-month waitlist and a personal referral. He made her feel like the world had finally decided to open its arms to her, after all those years of keeping its distance. He proposed 14 months into the relationship. A rooftop in Manhattan. A ring that cost more than her mother's apartment building. She said yes. She told herself she meant it. But 3 weeks before the proposal, 3 weeks before that rooftop, before that ring, before that yes, something had already happened. Something she had not planned. Something she had not seen coming. His name was Danny Rivera. He was 32 years old. He owned a small auto repair shop in Queens. Just him and 2 other guys, a rack of tools, a radio that only picked up 2 stations clearly, and a calendar on the wall from 2 years ago that no one had bothered to replace. He was not wealthy. He did not have silver temples or a personal assistant or a jet waiting at Teterboro. He had grease under his fingernails that never fully washed out, and a laugh that started in his whole chest before it reached his face, and a way of looking at Vivian like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. Not because of what she could do for him, but just because of her. Vivian had brought her car to his shop 6 months earlier. Check engine light. Something minor. She expected to drop the keys and come back in an hour. Instead, she sat in the small waiting area with its plastic chairs and its ancient vending machine. And Danny came out from behind the car with grease on his cheek, and a question about whether she'd noticed any changes in the car's acceleration, and they talked. Not about the car. About everything. About Cleveland and Queens. About mothers who worked too hard. About what it felt like to be in a room full of people who had always had more than you and to pretend that didn't make you tired. She went back the next week. Car was fine. She invented a noise. She knew what she was doing. She told herself she would stop. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself that what she had with Elliot was real and important and that Danny was just a feeling, not a future. But feelings have a way of becoming futures when you stop paying attention. By the time Elliot proposed on that rooftop, Vivian had already been seeing Danny for 4 months. Secret phone calls from the bathroom. Afternoons carved out between meetings. A whole hidden life she had constructed with the same careful precision she applied to everything else. She said yes to Elliot. And then she drove to Queens. And she didn't tell Danny about the ring. The engagement was announced quietly at first. A notice in the business section of 2 New York papers. A short post on Elliot's rarely used social media. But within a week it had spread. Ashford Global's PR team took over. Suddenly there were profile pieces. A spread in a lifestyle magazine. Photos of Vivian in Elliot's penthouse. Looking radiant and effortlessly happy. She was good at looking effortlessly happy. She had been practicing since she was 7 years old. The wedding was set for 11 months away. The venue was booked. A historic estate in Connecticut with a grand lawn and a stone chapel that had stood since 1887. The guest list topped 400. Elliot's assistant sent Vivian a binder. An actual 3-inch binder. With timelines and vendor contacts and color swatches organized by season. Vivian opened the binder once. Then she put it on a shelf and closed the shelf door. She kept seeing Danny. He tried to stop. She genuinely tried. After the engagement was official, she didn't call him for 9 days. 9 whole days, which felt to her like something between discipline and suffocation. On the 10th day, she drove to Queens without telling herself she was going to until she was already on the bridge. She sat outside his shop for 6 minutes before going in. He looked up from under the hood of a sedan and saw her, and the way his face changed. Not surprised, not relieved, just quietly and completely glad. Undid every 9 days of trying. "I missed you," he said. Just like that. No performance. No calculation. "I know," she said. "I missed you too." She did not tell him about the wedding binder. She did not tell him about the stone chapel in Connecticut. She told herself she would figure it out. She told herself she had time. She didn't have as much time as she thought. Because in Elliot Ashford's world, a household ran on staff. And chief among that staff was a woman named Rosa Mendez. Rosa was 41. She had worked for Elliot for 6 years. She managed his penthouse, the cleaning, the meals when he ate at home, the logistics of a life that required more coordination than most people imagined. She was competent and quiet and largely invisible in the way that household staff often are to the people they serve. She had a particular gift for anticipating what was needed before it was asked for. She stocked the refrigerator with exactly what Elliot wanted before he knew he wanted it. She had the dry cleaning back before he realized he'd sent it. She was, in every practical sense, the person who kept his private world functioning. And she had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 3 years old, with round cheeks and 2 uneven pigtails that Rosa did fresh every morning with more hope than skill, and a laugh that sounded like someone shaking a jar of buttons. Rosa had no husband. He had left before Lily was born, and no family in New York, just a cousin in Brooklyn she saw twice a year. So on the days when Rosa worked at the penthouse and couldn't find childcare, Lily came with her. Elliot had approved this arrangement without complaint. He was rarely home during the days. What did he care if a toddler played quietly in the kitchen? Vivian, when she learned about this, had been warm to Lily from the first moment. That was just who Vivian was. She crouched down to Lily's level. She asked her questions like they mattered. She called her Miss Lily, and made Lily giggle every time. When Rosa was nervous about bringing her daughter to the penthouse, Vivian was the one who said, "She's no trouble at all. She's the best part of the morning." Lily loved Vivian. She followed her around the kitchen. She showed Vivian her drawings, abstract, enthusiastic works that could have been a dog or a cloud or an emotion, impossible to say. When Vivian sat at the counter with her coffee and her phone, Lily would climb onto the stool next to her and sit there, very seriously, as though they were colleagues reviewing reports together. Children notice everything. This is a thing that adults consistently forget, because children are small and their opinions do not yet carry weight, and so adults begin to treat them the way they treat furniture. Present but not watching. Lily was watching. She was 3 years old and she could not have told you what a secret was. She could not have articulated the concept of a hidden life or a double relationship or a betrayal. She didn't have those words. She didn't have any of those frameworks. But she had eyes. And she had a memory. And she had the pure, unfiltered honesty of a child who has not yet learned that some things are supposed to stay unsaid. It was Rosa who first noticed something was slightly off about Vivian's schedule. Not because she was suspicious. Rosa was not the suspicious type, but because she was observant and because patterns were her whole job. She noticed that Vivian sometimes came home in the afternoon and changed her shirt before Elliot returned. She noticed that Vivian's phone was always face down. She noticed that Vivian sometimes stood by the window with a particular kind of stillness, not relaxed but held like a person containing something. Rosa noticed. She said nothing. It was not her business. But she noticed. And her daughter, her tiny round-cheeked button-laughing daughter, was always there. During this period, Vivian discovered she was pregnant. She sat in the bathroom of a midtown Starbucks with a test she'd bought 3 stores away from her apartment, and she stared at the result, and she did the math, and her hands started shaking. The timing made it Danny's. She was almost certain. More than almost. She sat in that Starbucks bathroom for 22 minutes. Someone knocked twice. She said, "Just a minute," both times. Then she wrapped the test in paper towels, buried it in her bag, and walked out into the afternoon light of a Tuesday in Manhattan, where everyone around her was rushing somewhere, carrying coffee, looking at their phones, living their completely ordinary lives. She drove to Queens. Danny Rivera had grown up in this part of Queens his whole life. He was the son of a mechanic. His father, Miguel, had owned a small shop on this same block for 22 years before his knees gave out, and he handed the business to Danny with nothing but the deed, the tools, and a handshake that said more than either of them knew how to say out loud. Danny had grown up sleeping in the back of that shop on slow afternoons, doing homework on the hood of whatever car happened to be there, learning the language of engines before he really learned anything else. He was not an ambitious man in the way that the world usually defines ambition. He did not want to expand. He did not want a second location or a franchise or a mention in some small business feature. He wanted to do his work well. He wanted to be home by 7. He wanted to have dinner that he cooked himself. He was a genuinely excellent cook, something that surprised everyone who first found out, and watch whatever game was on and sleep without his phone buzzing. He was a simple man with a deep life. That distinction mattered. When Vivian walked into his shop that Tuesday afternoon, he was elbow-deep in a transmission. He looked up. He saw her face. He put down the tool he was holding. "Hey," he said. "What happened?" She hadn't said anything yet. He just knew. That was Danny. He always knew. She told him in the office. The small room behind the garage with the folding chairs and the coffee maker that dripped slower than it should. She told him straight, because she could not think of another way to say it. She was pregnant. She was pretty sure it was his. She was engaged to someone else. The last part, she thought she had told him. She thought she had told him something at some point that made it clear. But sitting across from him in that folding chair, watching his face go through the information like a man reading news in a language he mostly knew, she understood that she had never actually said the words. She had implied. She had danced around. She had told herself she had told him when she had only thought about telling him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How long?" 11 months, she said. He looked at his hands. The grease on them. The ceiling. Back at her. "Are you going to marry him?" She didn't answer right away, and he nodded slowly, like the pause itself was the answer. "I need time," she said. "I need to think." "Okay," he said. He said it very quietly. Not angry. Not cold. Just accepting. Like a man who has learned that some things cannot be argued with. Like a man who loves someone enough to wait, even when waiting is the worst possible option. She drove home. She did not cancel the wedding. She did not tell Elliot. What she did, and this is the part that later made people the most upset, when everything finally came out, what she did was decide to pretend the baby was Elliot's. She told herself it might even be true. She told herself she wasn't sure. She told herself she would figure it out later, after the baby was born, after she had more information, after she had more time. She told herself so many things that were really just different versions of the same thing, which was, "I cannot face this right now." So she faced forward instead. She went to Elliot. She told him she was pregnant. She watched his face transform. Elliot Ashford, who controlled everything, who planned everything, who felt things slowly and expressed them even slower. She watched him stand up from his desk and walk to her and hold her face in both hands and say, very quietly, "This is the best thing." And she let him believe it. The wedding moved up 4 months. The Connecticut chapel was booked for spring instead of fall. The binder gained 30 more pages. Rosa was told the news and congratulated Vivian warmly. And Lily, who understood baby better than she understood most things, patted Vivian's still flat stomach with great seriousness and said, "Baby in there." "Yes," Vivian said and smiled. "Baby in there." In Queens, Danny sat in his shop and waited. He didn't call. He didn't push. He fixed cars and cooked dinner and went to bed and got up and did it again. He had told her, "I'll be here." And he meant it. Whatever being here looked like. The wedding was in 6 weeks. And Vivian, beautiful, smart, magnetic, exhausted Vivian, was still sleeping on the same side of 2 different lives, trying to believe that the ground under both of them was solid. The wedding was held on a Saturday in late April. The Connecticut estate was everything a wedding venue is supposed to be. Rolling green grounds still new from spring, white tents strung with soft lights, the stone chapel draped in cream-colored flowers that had been flown in from somewhere with a name Vivian couldn't remember. 400 guests. A string quartet. Elliot's mother in pale blue, already crying before the ceremony started. Vivian stood in the bridal suite an hour before the walk, in her dress, looking at herself in the mirror. The dress was extraordinary. It was a silhouette that somehow made her look both delicate and powerful, which was not an easy thing to do. Her hair was up. The diamond earrings were Elliot's, a wedding morning gift, delivered by his assistant with a small card in his measured handwriting. For the woman who changes everything. E. She held the card. She put it down. She picked up her phone. Looked at it. Put it back. She had not spoken to Danny in 8 weeks. 8 weeks of silence, which felt like something between discipline and grief. She had blocked his number the week after she told Elliot about the pregnancy. Not because she stopped caring. Because she knew that if she didn't, she would call him the moment she felt weak, and she would feel weak constantly. She looked at herself in the mirror. She said, "Okay." She said it out loud. Just once. And then she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was, by all accounts, beautiful. Elliot cried, which surprised everyone because Elliot was not known for crying. Just 2 tears, controlled, almost formal but real. Vivian said her vows in a clear, steady voice. She meant every word in the way that a person can mean something and also simultaneously be somewhere else entirely. They were pronounced married at 4:17 in the afternoon. By 4:20, the string quartet began again, and the guests applauded, and a photographer captured Vivian throwing her head back in laughter at something Elliot whispered in her ear. She was laughing. The laughter was real. The joy was real. The guilt was also real. All of it real all at once. That is what Vivian had become, a woman who contained so many real things that she had run out of room to name them. Rosa was not at the wedding. She had, of course, not been invited. She was the housekeeper, not a family friend. But she had sent a card, and tucked inside the card was a drawing from Lily. A drawing that was supposed to be, Lily had explained very seriously to Rosa, Viv and the man and the flowers. Vivian found the drawing weeks later in the card envelope. She kept it. She wasn't sure why. The first months of marriage were quieter than she expected. Elliot was the same man he had always been. Precise, present on his own terms, genuinely affectionate in the carefully measured way that was just who he was. He touched her hand at dinners. He asked about her work. When the pregnancy began to show, he would sometimes, without announcing it, just put his hand on her stomach while they watched something in the evenings. She had stopped working full-time. Elliot hadn't asked her to. She had offered, and he had accepted. She told herself it made sense. The pregnancy, the new life, the adjustment. She told herself this was what she wanted. She thought about Danny less and less. Or she told herself she did. Rosa came 3 days a week now. Lily came sometimes still, on days when there was no other option. She was almost 4 now. The pigtails were getting better. Rosa had found a YouTube tutorial. Lily called Vivian Viv. She had her own name for everyone. Elliot she called the tall one, which made Rosa mortified and Vivian secretly delighted. One afternoon, about 6 months into the marriage, something happened that was small but not small. Vivian was on the phone in the bedroom. She didn't notice Lily standing in the hallway. Lily had come to find her to show her another drawing. This one was a purple cat being brave, Lily would explain later. She stood in the hallway holding her drawing. And she heard Vivian say a name. Danny. Just once. Just his name, in a voice that Lily had never heard from Vivian before. Lower, softer, a voice that sounded like something being held very gently so it wouldn't break. Lily stood in the hallway. She looked at the purple cat being brave. She went back to the kitchen. She said nothing. She was 3 years old, almost 4. She did not know what she had heard. But she had heard it. And it stayed in her the way things stay in children. Not as a thought exactly, but as a knowing. As something true that she could feel but couldn't explain. The baby was born on a Thursday in November. A girl. 7 pounds 2 ounces. A full head of dark hair and the loudest cry in the maternity ward. Nurses said this affectionately, the way nurses do. Elliot held her first, which had been something Vivian had not expected to feel anything about, and then did. He held her like she was the most important thing he had ever touched, which Vivian understood watching him she was. She was the most important thing. Elliot had built empires and managed billions and sat across from presidents and not blinked. And now he was holding 7 pounds of new person, and his hands were shaking slightly and his eyes were full. "She looks like you," he said. Vivian said, "Let me see." He handed her over. Vivian looked at her daughter, at her dark hair, at the shape of her face, at her tiny fingers already curled into fists. She knew. She had known really for a while. But now she held the knowing in her arms and there was no more telling herself maybe, or later, or I'll figure it out. She named her Alma. Elliot suggested it. It was his grandmother's name. Vivian agreed. Meant soul. The first weeks were the softening, swallowing blur that new parenthood always is. Vivian slept in fragments. Elliot hired a night nurse, but Vivian kept waking anyway, going to check, needing to see. Alma was small and perfect and completely demanding, and Vivian, organized, competent, charming, strategic Vivian, found herself dissolved into a love so total it scared her. Rosa returned to a fuller schedule. Lily, now 4, met Alma and was extremely serious about the whole thing. She stood over the bassinet and studied the baby with the focused expression of a tiny scientist. "She's wrinkled," Lily said. "All babies are," Vivian said. "You too," Lily said. "Yes, me too." Lily considered this. "Okay," she said and patted Vivian's hand, which was possibly the most comforting thing anyone said to Vivian in those early weeks. At 2 months, Elliot suggested a paternity-related DNA test. Not out of suspicion, he said. Just as a keepsake. A modern thing people did to know the baby's health background, to have the information. He'd read about it somewhere. Vivian said of course. She said it evenly. She agreed to schedule it. She did not schedule it. Then, 9 months after Alma's birth, Alma, who was round and loud and increasingly funny, who had learned to army crawl by launching herself head first and hoping, Vivian made a mistake. Not a dramatic mistake. Not a scene. Tiny, quiet mistake. She left her journal on the kitchen counter. She didn't think of it as a journal. It was a notebook she'd had for years, spiral-bound, unassuming. She'd written in it erratically. Notes, fragments, things she was trying to work through. She hadn't hidden it carefully because she hadn't thought anyone would pick it up. Rosa wouldn't have. Rosa had a strict, private personal code about other people's things. But Lily was 4. And Lily loved anything on the counter because counters were at the exact boundary of her reach. And things on counters were always interesting. She pulled the notebook to the edge. Fell open. Lily could not read. She was 4. But there was something on the page she recognized. Because Vivian had done what people sometimes do in their private notebooks. She had written a name not in words but with a small sketch next to it. Little garage. Tiny wrench symbol. The way you annotate something that lives in your memory as an image, not a sentence. Lily recognized it the way children recognize things, not logically but completely. She looked at the page. She was still holding it when Rosa came into the kitchen. Rosa looked at the notebook. She looked at the page. She didn't read it. She looked away immediately, out of principle. But she had seen enough to see that it was a page of personal writing, and below a heavily underscored line, the name, Danny. Rosa took the notebook from Lily gently, closed it, put it back where it had been. She said nothing. But her face had changed. And Lily, who noticed everything, noticed that too. The afternoon that everything broke open was ordinary in every way except for what happened in it. Elliot was home early. His afternoon meeting had ended an hour ahead of schedule, which was unusual for him. He came in quietly, suit jacket over his arm, tie loosened, looking like a man who was for once slightly off his regular rhythm. Vivian was in the nursery with Alma. Rosa was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Lily was sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of cut fruit and her crayons, doing what she did most afternoons, drawing things with great seriousness and narrating them to no one in particular. Elliot came into the kitchen. He said hello to Rosa. He looked at Lily's drawing. Lily held it up for him to see. "That's the tall one," she told him, pointing to a figure in the picture. "Is that me?" he said. "Yes," she said. "And that's Viv." She pointed to a smaller figure. "And who's that?" he said, pointing to a third figure she'd drawn, a man-shaped figure standing slightly apart, near what appeared to be a square building. Lily looked at the drawing. She looked at Elliot. She looked at the drawing again. "That's Danny," she said. Rosa at the stove went very still. Elliot looked at Lily. His voice was careful and calm. "Who's Danny?" Lily was not a child who invented people. She was a child who reported what she knew with complete factual innocence. She pointed to the square building in her drawing. "He fixes cars," she said. "Viv loves him." She said it the way she might say, "The sky is blue," without drama, without awareness of what she was handing over. She says his name in a sad voice. In the bedroom. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Rosa turned slowly from the stove and looked at Elliot. Elliot's face did not collapse, did not crumple. It went through something slower and more terrible, a stillness like a man who has just understood something and needs a moment to fully arrive in the knowledge. He looked at Rosa. "Has she mentioned this name to you?" Rosa hesitated for just 1 second. "I saw it," she said quietly. "In a notebook. I didn't read it. I didn't want to be involved." He nodded. He set his jacket on the back of a chair with the same precision he brought to everything. And then he walked down the hall to the nursery. Vivian was sitting in the nursing chair with Alma. Alma, who was 10 months old now and enormous and happy and completely unaware of everything. And she looked up when Elliot appeared in the doorway, and something in his face told her. She didn't know how. She just knew. "Elliot," she said. "Tell me about Danny," he said. The name in his voice in this room, it landed like something physical. Alma gurgled, reached up, grabbed Vivian's finger. And Vivian looked at her daughter, at her face, at the face that looked like Danny's around the eyes and the mouth in a way that Vivian had been finding ways not to see for 10 months. And she told the truth. All of it. The garage in Queens. The 4 months before the engagement. The pregnancy and the math and the decision she had made and all the ways she had told herself it was okay when she had always known it wasn't. She talked for a long time. Elliot stood in the doorway and listened without interrupting. He had that quality, the ability to receive information completely, to let it arrive all the way before responding. When she was done, the room was quiet again except for Alma, who had fallen asleep against her chest. Elliot looked at his daughter, at Alma, who he had held since the first second she existed, who he had loved with every precise and careful piece of his complicated heart. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Vivian. "I need you to leave," he said. Not angry, not screaming, just clear and broken and completely unmistakable. She left that night. With Alma. With a bag. With nothing else she could carry. She drove to Queens at 11 o'clock at night and she sat outside the garage apartment for a while, looking up at the light in the window, and then she got out of the car with her sleeping daughter in her arms and she knocked on the door. Danny answered in a t-shirt and bare feet, and he looked at her, and then he looked at Alma, and his face did what it always did. It just told the truth about how he felt, without performance or calculation. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. She came in. That was 2 years ago. Today, Vivian and Danny are married. Quietly at the courthouse, with 2 witnesses and Lily as the only flower girl, a role she took extraordinarily seriously and prepared for with a week of practice dropping petals from her fist into the bathtub. Alma is almost 3 now. She has Danny's laugh, the kind that starts in the chest. She calls him Daddy and she calls the shop Daddy's big car house. And she has a tiny stool next to his workbench where she sits and hands him things and is convinced she is helping. Elliot Ashford took a long time. He went through what you would expect a man to go through when the ground moves under him like that. But he was not a man who stayed destroyed. He is doing what he has always done, building things, managing things, moving forward with precision. He sees Alma sometimes. It took time to get there, and it took lawyers, and it took conversations that were very hard, and it took a version of grace from Elliot that surprised even him. But he sees her. 'Cause she was real. His love for her was real. And love, it turns out, does not require biology to be completely true. Rosa still works for Elliot. She asked quietly if she should resign after everything. He told her no. He told her she had done nothing wrong. Which was true. Lily started kindergarten this fall. She drew a picture on the first day. My family and my other family and Alma, who is both, she told her teacher, pointing to each figure. Her teacher looked at the drawing for a while. This is very detailed, she said. Yes, said Lily. I notice things. She does. She always has. And that noticing, that pure, innocent, unstoppable 3-year-old honesty, cracked a life open and let the light in. Not because a child meant to change everything, but because she didn't know she wasn't supposed to. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget, drop your country in the comments. We want to know where our family is watching from.